Thank you guys for coming out. This is Brownsville Heritage House. I am Miriam Robinson. We have an exciting evening for you. We have MisEducation of All Access Golf. And I'm going to bring out our host to you, who is going to be presenting tonight, Mr. Kelley Pierre. So give a round of applause for Mr. Kelley Pierre.
Just thank you for coming out today. We also believe that games like golf have the power to build like individual character, and just strengthen entire communities as well. And that's why we're dedicated to making golf accessible to people all across New York, as well as different economic stratas and demographics. So just a little bit about what we do. We work with schools. The way that we work with schools is with developing golf programs, ensuring golf exposure to students, especially within certain demographics of communities. And then we also work to incorporate golf into the school curriculum. Just also pardon me, because if I'm sniffling is because, what's been going around. But we also work with professionals, teaching them golf fundamentals, also learning just overall, like golf principles, fundamentals, also getting them acquainted into like the golf like environment. We ensure that we make sure that they're not only dependent on us for lessons, but they can also have community in which they could continue to play. We also do community engagement. We feel that the sport like golf has really has an elitist air to it, and we really work to deconstruct that, and we'll kind of get into like why that even exists. But we're also really advocate about overall well-being and enriching lives. So lastly, part of what we do is also consulting. So any projects in terms of whether it be change management, any schools who may be interested in working together in developing golf curriculum, that's what we do, right? So there are ways in which you could stay connected with All Access Golf. We have our Facebook, we have our YouTube channel. We are currently doing something where it's called Golf Griots, which is it's an oral history project. Griots are basically from the previous generation, and they're really supposed to impart wisdom. And we use that because not only is that an African system, but golf is very closely tied to how life is. So we see the connection between the two, and from that, that's really the concept behind it. And then also we have our Instagram as well. So those are the handles. You can also, if you're interested in getting lessons, you can also sign up on our website, allaccessgolfllc.com. And under the lessons and events, you'll see the 2025 cohorts. That's the sign up page for when we begin, once it gets nice outside. So if you're also interested in terms of just anything in the future which we'll put on, you could definitely join our email list as well. And you could do that through our website too. So at the end, we'll have at the end of this session, at the end of the presentation, we'll be having some merchandise in which you can, purchase, and also anything in terms of just anything in terms of our upcoming events as well. You'll be like notified. So, just going through our overall agenda for tonight. What we're gonna do is the event's called MisEducation of All Access Golf, and the reason why I chose the title is because there's several different things, right? When we look at Carter G. Woodson, his work, and how it was really pivotal, his book, which was published in 1933, MisEducation of the Negro. So is that component the work, and then also the different components that he talks about in the book is very heavy, right? And this is almost 100 years, almost 100 years ago. Then also the connection with Brownsville, right? And I feel like that's important as well, because a lot of times we see our figures in in Black history as like these it's sort of like these far off figures, right? But they're very much closely like tied to our everyday life, right? And we'll really talk about that as well. And we talk about Brownsville, right? So I'm from Brownsville. This is really a special place. I know my sister, she's in the back, and it's kind of funny being here because it's like we grew up going to the library because that was like the only place we could go, right? Because it was Brownsville in the 90s, right? 90s, early 2000s. So and like we have places like the Brownsville Heritage House, and I feel that it's important that we not only keep utilizing these these spaces, but this is also where we get like educated, right? Because things that aren't necessarily always found in schools, it can't necessarily be standardized, right? But we still need to have it in order for us to eventually become like griots and be able to pass the history down. So what we're really going to be exploring is Carter G. Woodson's work, Brownsville's history, the connection between Carter G. Woodson and Brownsville, and then MisEducation in relation to the sport of golf. So we look at who was Carter G. Woodson. Now, Carter G. Woodson is, he's known as, the father. He really is a pivotal figure, father of Black History Month. And, he was the second person to receive a PhD from Harvard, majoring in history. And I just want to read a quote where it says that Woodson championed awareness of Black historical experience by teaching and initiating the first Black History Week. And what Woodson did is that he created two really specific books, right? In which he is widely which has made him wildly popular, and they are The Education of the Negro Prior to 1861 and The Education of the Negro. So The Education of the Negro is actually a pre-read before reading The MisEducation of the Negro. And what's interesting about The Education of the Negro is that it talks about basically Black people's quest for education and the building of education as institutions, right? So it also, talks about how these institutions were created, some, being, black people who, like came together and, established these institutions, as well as, white people who were also helping to educate, black people or Negroes, right? But I do want to read a piece from the book. It says that the early advocates of the education of Negroes were of three classes. First, masters who desired to increase the economic efficiency of their labor supply. Second, sympathetic persons who wished to help the oppressed. And third, zealous missionaries who, believing that the message of divine love came equally to all. Those taught slaves the English language that they might learn the principles of the Christian religion. And he goes on to further say, each slaveholder dealt with the situation to suit himself, regardless of public opinion. And that's something that's really telling, because even though you have an institution established and like now you're becoming educated, you have to also kind of question that, like, what expense, right? And who does it really benefit? Does it benefit you, or does it benefit you within the system? So with that, he also established, or also wrote, the MisEducation of the Negro. And this is where a lot of this is his most popular work. And the thing about MisEducation of the Negro is that he does it in a way where it's very I would say is very like slick, right? And really the miseducated Negroes are the ones who have become educated, right? But really educated through, a system, format, and, like they've got degrees and stuff like that. But they've also lost touch of, I guess, like the essence, right? And they've become so systemized in terms of just how things like operate, that they kind of don't really, they've basically kind of lost touch, right? And there's several quotes in which he just really goes further into that. But I just want to read one, and it says, Negroes who are imitating whites then are engaged in a most unprofitable performance. Why not interpret themselves anew to the world, right? So this is just, just to kind of brush up on, who Carter G. Woodson was, as well as his influential works regarding education. So what we're going to look at is, Brownsville, like in the early days, right? Now, Brownsville, it first started off, it was named after Charles S. Brown, who built 250 frame houses after 1865. In 1887, tenements were constructed and enticed Jewish garment workers from the Lower East Side to live there. In the 1920s to the 1940s, it was the center for labor radicalism, which is very interesting because this was more like a political ideology. And, it was really kind of at the, during this time you have, a lot of industries that are, emerging, like steel. This is when, steel industry was big. There were like, the Carnegies and, everything like that. And really capitalism was just growing, right? And so with labor radicalism, you have certain key figures who were very influential in terms of the union, and they were, really about the people, really about, they even, you have certain, I would say schools of thought within labor radicalism that spoke about that union members should not, make a certain amount, meaning like to where the CEOs are, making like, or anything like that. And also that another thing is that they were saying that you should never want to just be a union president. It should really be, the people decide that you are one, or they vote and you become one, but it's never something that you seek out, to do, right? Because that means that you're more after a position as opposed to, doing the actual work. So in this ideology, it favored the unions in the time of, expanding capitalism. And then Brownsville elected socialists to the state assembly between 1915 and 1921, and a candidate of the American Labor Party in 1936. This was when Brownsville was, really more heavily like Jewish. And from that, later around like the 1950s and 1960s is when the integration started. So I don't know, I want to, kind of give a pop quiz. So anyone ever heard of Margaret Sanger? Okay, so can you tell me about her? So what you said, right, is very interesting, right? And you are right. It's very touchy, right? Because so the history with Margaret Sanger, she is a very controversial figure, right? She opened up. So all right, abortion clinic, right? Eugenics, right? And yeah, and that was like in line with the Nazis, right? And then she also worked, because the thing is that she did attend and speak at a rally in New Jersey. I think it was 1926. 1926. She made a speech on birth control to a woman's auxiliary branch of the Ku Klux Klan, right? So now the thing is that she also worked with W.E. Du Bois, and it was called like the Negro Project, right? Yeah. So, and what they were, doing is, she was basically kind of like, it was, certain people aren't made to have children, right? This was like the thought, right? And the thing is that what's interesting about her is that the first abortion clinic in the world was made in Brownsville, right? Right there, yeah, 26 Amboy Street, right? Yeah, and the thing is it ran for about 9 or 10 days, and during that time there was about 450 women that went to see her, right? And within 10 days, this was the Jewish, and she was actually Irish, and she was one of 11 children that her parents had. Her mother had 7 miscarriages, and I think by the age of 50, her mother had died of tuberculosis. She blamed her father for her mother's death due to the impact of, childbearing. And in 1916, founded the first birth control clinic in Brownsville. Now, this was definitely, of course, before Roe v. Wade, which was 1973, but before that, there was the Comstock laws, which was established in 1873, and the Comstock laws made it illegal to mail any kind of imaging or magazines that depicted birth control methods, condoms, and medical textbooks with illustrations of human anatomy, right? She also believed in eugenics, right? Which, it was definitely racist and ableist ideology that enables certain people unfit to have children, and that, eugenics is the theory that society can be improved through planned breeding for desirable traits like intelligence and industriousness, right? Nazis then, kind of adopted the eugenics to make, in order to make the perfect race, right? So this started in Brownsville, right? And in my thinking, I think that even still that, all right, abortion is one thing, right? But even understanding, when I was growing up, there was always the understanding that you could always be killed, and not necessarily by, the randomness that was going on, but, I think it's more because of just the ways of the system, right? And certain agents of the system in which they are, either trying to, lock you up, which they kind of do, right? You guys heard of $1 million blocks, right? We know that exists. There was about 2003 where 11 blocks in Brownsville basically combined to about 11 million towards a prison industrial complex, right? And we look at that, and when you see that, you can't think that it's the people, right? There's other factors as well, right? Density, it being one. Brownsville is the most dense. You have of public housing, so the interaction is going to be higher, right? But what I feel is that this is kind of like they kind of have it similar in the same way in which if they're not going to kill you, they'll just imprison you, right? But this is just my theory, right? Now, the reason why I put this, of course, you guys know who this is. This is Irv Gotti. He recently passed. He was a huge figure during the time when he was in the music industry. But what I wanted to point out is that I think if I'm not correct, Irv Gotti is really from Queens, right? But his record label was called Murder Inc., right? And huh? What, the label? DMX. Well, so we'll get into that, right? So the thing is that so Irv, was really, he was the one like really behind, because he was doing a lot of the producing and of Jay-Z, DMX, Ja Rule. And the thing is that so when it comes to Murder Inc., he actually was, I think he said that he was watching a documentary on I guess TV, and he really wanted to kind of just toughen up his image, but he learned about Murder Inc., right? And Murder Inc. was actually a yeah, right. Yeah. So Murder Inc. was actually it was actually a bunch of mobsters, right? And this is, of course, is not, anything that like is glorified, but it is history, right? Yeah. They were Jewish, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so Murder Inc. was, they were the Jewish mob, and they were really run under the Brownsville boys. Murder Inc. was part of the national crime syndicate, and it was a murder for hire group that was responsible for over 400 deaths. So they operated out of 779 Saratoga Avenue, which is, when you look at it, that's really where the Saratoga train station is, right? It was it's the corner store that's like right there, right by the steps. And they said that, during that time it was a candy store as well. And, there was like an old lady there, but behind everything was, hits happening, right? And this was hits that were, happening across the nation, right? So that's, basically that's, kind of like the history in terms of, Murder Inc. Now, when we look at education, I do want to just, I want to highlight this quote from the Education of the Negro, which is, it says that the persistent struggle of colored people to have their children educated at public expense shows how resolved they were to be enlightened. In the beginning, Negroes had no aspiration to secure such assistance. Because of free public schools were first regarded as a system to educate the poor, the friends of the free blacks turned them away from these institutions lest men might reproach them with becoming a public charge, right? Now, I want to talk about, so the building that we're in, right, is called the Stone Avenue branch, right? And this was, this is the children's library, first children's library in the nation. And this is also where the reason why the branch was created was because the original Brownsville branch, they felt that it was becoming just too overcrowded. So they built something specifically for kids in the area. This was when it was a Jewish neighborhood. And, so we talk about, the library, being established, right? And this was, this came from Andrew Carnegie, who funded the library. So it's over 100 years old. And then the picture to the right of it is, this was a picture that I took when I was in high school. And I just remember this school. Now it's a kidney dialysis center. And it was always interesting because I would be going to school, right? But I would pass by an abandoned school, right? And I just remember that one time I saw they put up a sign for realty, and I actually called them. I didn't have a job, let alone money, right? But I just remember it being for sale. But I always question, how does the school get abandoned, right? And there's definitely multiple reasons why, right? Which we'll get further into, but it just shows the disinvestment that had happened in the community, right? So we kind of have to ask, okay, how did this start? And going back into just overall history, there was the teacher strike, which happened in 1968, and this was very influential not only in Brownsville but across the nation, right? And what happened is that the parents wanted more representation regarding the teachers. There were some teachers that they wanted to get fired, and this was when the neighborhood was predominantly black and Latino, and there was sort of still like the Jewish people were still in the neighborhood, but this caused a major separation, and what happened is that they wanted some teachers to be fired because they felt that they were not doing a good job in terms of educating their children. The city gave control to the neighborhood in order to run the schools, and what resulted is what we now call community education councils, right? So now every school district has a council that's members of the community that also work alongside with the schools, and they discuss the curriculum, they go over what the budget is, and the services that are available, and one of the key influential figures in the teacher strike was Sonny Carson. He worked to desegregate and win community control, the hiring of black and Hispanic teachers as well as administrators. So now we'll talk about the Mother Gaston and Carter G. Woodson connection, right? So who was Mother Gaston? Of course, when we came here, we walked on Mother Gaston Boulevard, right? We're in the Brownsville Heritage House, run by Ms. Robinson, and the thing is that she was really a pivotal figure, right? She retired from her job at Berghoff Goodman in October 1956, and she wanted her retirement to be a gift of $1,000 to the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, right? So that sounds like great cause, especially as your retirement gift. That's really nice, but you kind of look at it and you ask, why did she do that, and what is the connection to Carter G. Woodson? So Carter G. Woodson was actually, he founded the study of Negro life and history, right? And her connection to Carter G. Woodson was that she was invited to attend the Negro History breakfast of the New York branch for the study of Negro life and history. And at first she was not convinced of the value of the work it was doing, right? And this is according to an article called The Dedicated Little Lady by Albert N. D. Brooks. And at one meeting, a stranger approached her and asked her, who she was, as well as how the work of the association might become known to more people. Mother Gaston said that the New York branch was a satisfied group, right? Sounds very Brownsville. And what was needed was more ordinary people to put the work over. From this conversation, Woodson said that he wanted ideas and help from an ordinary person like Mother Gaston, right? So he gave her, permission to organize the first Carter Woodson Club in 1945, and from that, she also helped raise funds for the annual Negro History breakfast, right? So before we get like Negro History Week, we were doing, just it was Negro History breakfast, right? This is, right before you have, Black History Month, right? So, and then, she really worked, she did a lot of work, within Carter G. Woodson's, organizations. And it says that one year the club sold tickets to fill 10 large tables, mostly with Berghoff Goodman employees. And even after that, she still wasn't satisfied, right? So she created the Carter Woodson Juniors and the Brooklyn branch of the association, right? She arranged a program on November 18th, 1956 at the Shalom Presbyterian Church with John Hope Franklin speaking on the new Negro history, right? Yes, yeah. So, and yes, another one. So that's true, because now when I was like researching, I'm like, okay, who's it's significant that like they mentioned it was John Hope Franklin, and in all honesty, I didn't even know who he was when I was looking into it, right? And then I researched about him, and then he was a historian that focused on Southern and African American history. He was professor and chairman of history at the department of the history department at Brooklyn College, starting in 1956, and he has a publication, From Slavery to Freedom, A History of Negro Americans in 1947, and the book has been widely used as the text for Black Studies courses, across multiple universities throughout the world, right? So he definitely, had, very notable speaker, right? That Mother Gaston was able to, get to speak on, the new Negro history. And the thing is also that he was a member of the research team for the Supreme Court's landmark case, Brown versus Board of Education, right? So now when we look at Brownsville in terms of housing, right? Also some, very, influential people as well. So it's you're able to see it, but this is Brother Joseph, right? He was from the Temple number 66, and from the Moorish Holy Temple of Science. And what he was able to do is that it was the first development of non-public low and moderate income housing in New York City. $12 million was developed to develop the Noble Drew Ali Plaza, one, and which was 5 6-story elevator buildings containing 385 apartments. It was the city's first HUD private housing project, which the sponsor, developer, architect, and contractor were all minority members, right? And that is something that, like, again, I didn't know, right? Huh? Yeah, right?
You're talking about what we call the Plaza.
Right.
On Rockaway and,
Yeah, yeah. Right. The gate. Right.
And I remember when it was built, they had, it was security there, so you couldn't just walk in. It was very, very daycare there. I think it was the
decline.
Decline. I used the word decline. And now, but
Yeah.
now in the last few years, they have been trying to change it, but it still has that stigma attached to it.
Yeah. So yeah, this was first time, this happened in the city, right? That you have, all of the major players that, are coming down, to build housing, and, all of them were black, right? So, and what thing is that originally he in the article it says that he actually got into what he did. He took a role to learn about housing because he saw that there would be an opportunity later on down the line where a lot of black people would be in need of housing, right? So he took a job. I think it was working with HUD, so that he could learn the workings, the inner workings, and then from there, that's when he was able to, really situate himself so that he can be able to develop housing. Huh? Really? Oh wow! Oh shoot! Oh, that's cool. So and now, so this is more speculative, right? But this is, something in which like I've really kind of come to understand, like I'll say probably like within the last like 6 months, right? So typically, just in general, you have the Central Library. So the Central Library is Eastern Parkway and Flatbush Avenue. Everybody knows Grand Army Plaza, right? So the thing is that I also went to school not far from there, which was Meg Evans College, and most of the time, like I'm probably just like in the library reading, or I'm going to different libraries, right? And one of the things that I learned about the Central Library is that from an aerial view, right, it's made to look like an open book, right? And, I always found that interesting. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And, this only really came about because when there was like a meeting that the Medga, it was sort of like a strategy meeting, like with Medga's college, and one of the things that came up was, should the logo be changed, right? And the logo that was being used was an open book, right? So one of the arguments, I'm like, no, keep the logo, because it also, kind of represents the area as well, because it's close to the Central Library and it's an open book, and that's, the building is an open book, right? Now, the reason why I say this, right, is because when I was in, Brownsville, a couple months ago, right? I grew up in Brownsville houses. Right across the street was Langston Hughes, right? And Langston Hughes, tall buildings, right? They always, I would always remember, like in the mornings, there would be probably like within a 20 or 30-minute window when the sun would actually shine inside like the apartment. Right, but else than that, it was just always shadows, right? Why? Because Langston Hughes was always in the way, right? And so I was there, a couple months ago, and then I was like, hold on. Basically, Langston Hughes, those buildings are similar to the Central Public Library, in which, from an aerial view, they look like books, right? And of course, it makes sense, right? Because not only is it called Langston Hughes, and what was he? He was an author, right? And then, like going, seeing, the poetry that they have, right? I was like, wow, okay, like it really helped me to see, Langston Hughes, differently. I would always pass by Langston Hughes just growing up, just to go to Pickens or Belmont, right? And what was the thing with that is that it kind of really makes you think like differently about the way that Brownsville was made when we talk about Noble Jewelry, Plaza, and then also Langston Hughes. Matter of fact, Langston Hughes even advocated, right, for Brownsville Heritage House, right? Everybody is right outside. Yeah, a letter from Langston Hughes, like we just walked past it casually, right? And like again, these are big figures in Black history, right? And the thing is, it's like, so these buildings are made, they're made to look like they're structured to be books, right? So again, like I'm always like in the library, right? But I thought that I think it's kind of cool that so technically people who live in Langston Hughes, they live in a book, right? You get it, double entendre, right? But then it kind of also made me think about, okay, you live in a book, right? But what else do you do? When you live in a place, you also sleep in it, right? And when you sleep, what do? You dream, right? And then what happens when a dream is deferred, right? So I'm like, oh, okay. So then, it kind of went back to it. And then, I looked at the last three lines of, Hughes's poem, and it says, and it's from what happens to, a dream deferred. And it says, maybe it sags like a heavy load, or does it explode, right? And, it kind of makes you think of just, what really happens when, a dream, becomes deferred. And then makes you think of, what ways am I making, space for the future generations, right? So that their dream isn't, deferred, right? So that really just spoke to me, and it's like you kind of see now I see Langston differently, right? And now of course my company is golf. We always look at things, right? But like we're also looking at it and also relating it to like golf, right? So now we look at, what are some ways in which, MisEducation, kind of shows up in golf, right? So when we talk about just overall, like when we talk about the history of, golf, right? I want to, just point out some, several, key figures, right? And the matter of fact, the first one, the one on the right, is actually his name was John Shippen, right? And he was the first American born golf professional, right? Black or white, it's John Shippen, right? And if you go online on the YouTube channel, you can check out on the All Access Golf YouTube page. It was an event that we had done, and it's called Blacks in Golf: The History of Shady Rests and John Shippen. And it talks about John Shippen, who was the swing coach for the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan. He was teaching them how to perfect their swing. He played in the second U.S. Open. And then, and that happened in 1896. Then you have Dewey Brown. Dewey Brown was a PGA member, and he was a PGA member up until 1934, right? He was, he made clubs for presidents. I think it was Coolidge. I think it was Calvin Coolidge, and he would always like engrave his golf clubs as well. And it was in 1934 that the PGA clause was established, right? And what is the PGA clause? The PGA clause is basically they forbid anyone who was not who was not a Caucasian male, right, over the age of 18, from becoming a member of the PGA, right? So this PGA clause lasted to about 1961, and it was first broken by Joe Louis on the amateur level, and then professionally it was broken by Charlie Sifford, right? The thing is that the PGA clause, existed for so long, right, that you still have, and this is where you could kind of make the argument that the reason why golf is perceived to be, typically a white male sport is because you were kind of conditioned to, right? They told you that, this is who is supposed to be playing the game, right? And that's a form of miseducation. And even Woodson talks about in his book that you can basically indoctrinate. You could indoctrinate a race so much that they would take a after a while, they would take a subservient role, right? And you don't even have to tell them, right? Because it becomes so ingrained into them, right? And, I think like just, understanding, the history as well as like the impact that, the clause has had on the perception of the game, and then also its, accessibility as well, because if places were being constructed, especially when you have, all of this, development happening, it would have made the game more accessible, right? Because institutions as well as places would have been more accommodating, to have more sports, but that's that's also what we mean in terms of miseducation, right? How just overall information can help to shape thought, right? And another form of miseducation that I've recently learned myself is this is goes back to the golf griot or a history project that I had mentioned before, and I interviewed the late James Black, right? And he was very knowledgeable, in golf. Like looking at his other like interviews, like he I would say he knew the game on a mystical level, right? So I know there's some people who on social media, stuff like that, and I know I don't know if you guys ever seen there's a guy like Lethal Shooter, right? And his tagline is I understand it now, right? After like he misses one and then he's like okay, and then he he ends up making it, right? But Mr. Black, I would say like looking at his accomplishments, he played on the PGA Tour, played on the UGA Tour, which was the UGA Tour was United Golfers Association, which was a separate tournament that developed during the time of the PGA clause. And one thing he said to me, we were talking about, just overall kind of like golf fundamentals, and he said that it's not the grip, it's the handle, right? So typically when you're first starting out, you go to a golf clinic, preferably all access golf, right? But but so you're from Metro Jewels, right? Yes, right? So right? Fundamentally speaking, right? The first thing that they say, right, is what's the most important part of the swing is how you hold it, right? And what they call it is the grip, right? Typically, across the golf industry. But what he said is, he was like, it's really called the handle, right? And I'm like, what? Like I didn't get it. But then I just took some time, and then I was like, wait, what does the grip actually mean, right? And by definition, it means to take and keep a firm hold of, and to grasp tightly, right? And that actually goes against how it technically is the wrong word to use when holding a club, because Hogan talks about when you're holding the club as if you're holding a wounded bird with a broken wing, right? So you want to be able to hold the club, right? But you're not trying to put any tight force on it, right? Because then that now goes into your forearms, and then from that tension in your forearms, you now become stiff in your swing, right? Now that in itself was like from a foundation perspective, right, completely different, right? So instead, I always say, especially when doing beginning clinics, that if I say grip, what I mean is handle, but I really try and use the word handle instead, because it really has the proper definition of what is meant by holding the club, right? So just want to kind of leave you guys with this quote from Carter G. Woodson. The chief value in studying the records of others is to become better acquainted with oneself and with one's possibilities to live and to do in the present age. And that's from MisEducation of the Negro. So the things that we explored just during this talk was Carter G. Woodson's work, the Brownsville's history, the connection between Carter G. Woodson and Brownsville, and then MisEducation when it comes to the relation to the sport of golf. And thanks. So cool.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. It was a pleasure. You could have been any place else, but you chose to be with us here at Brownsville Heritage House. So we want to thank you. We hope you got a lot of information about all access golf tonight. I did. I learned a few things like, hey, wow, Langston Hughes project looked like a book. Who knew? Way. So it is really, really great. I want to thank our presenter, Kelley Pierre, for giving us the MisEducation of all access golf. So thank you again. Get home safely. Love you guys.